Hello everyone, my name is Luke Briner and I am the developer of the SimSig importer tool. This is the second version of the video, so as I update it I will say that at the start of the video just so that you know if you've already seen this or if there have been more updates since you last watched. So why the importer tool? Well, very simply, if you have ever tried to develop a timetable in SimSig, so this is Wolverhampton, this is a relatively small simulation compared to, you know, Saltley, Birmingham New Street, you know, Liverpool Street, some of those ones are absolutely enormous. You'll quickly work out that the sort of pain of going through these tabs and adding individual trains just takes so long to do it. So let's say, for example, just this one train here, 5E44. So I've got to click there, I've got to go 5E44. An entry point, well, this one's from Oxley carriage siding, so I've got to, you know, fiddle down a drop down list. Entry time there is 0001. So you can see here that even if you get used to sort of tabbing and things, it's not massively fast to do. And then of course after that you've then got to choose a train type. I haven't added one, so then I might have to go, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. So train type, add a new train type, again filling in a load of details. Lots of faff, lots of annoyance, and worse than all of that is you mostly have to do all of these and enter loads and loads of trains before you can even test whether you've done it correctly. And then if you do need to alter something, you know, you're having to dig through perhaps hundreds and hundreds of entries here to work out which one's not quite right. Bearing in mind that you will have already created this spreadsheet probably anyway as a way of actually simplifying your timetable, taking out the data that you need and working out what's what. So is there an alternative? Well, at the minute, if you go, let's just delete that one for now. If you go into the timetable menu, you can import from XML, but how are you going to generate the XML? And the answer is, well, again, you'd have to sort of hand crank it, and that's you know, just really annoying. If you then add in things like, say, day of the week is quite a common mechanism where people want to build a sort of master timetable containing multiple days in it and then have a way of choosing one of those when you run the timetable. And there are a couple of ways of doing that. As a timetable developer, you can simply create specific timetables for certain days. You could say this is a summer Monday or a winter Saturday or whatever you like. And of course that adds to the complexity, because then you might have to create 3 kind of similar but kind of different timetables and try and keep all of those in sync, which can be a pain in the neck. The other way that's kind of more popular, I think, probably more because it's easier to do it rather than it makes a lot more sense than having separate timetables, is simply to create what's called a decision. And a decision is effectively a number of choices that the simulation will pick at random for you, and you can give some choices more weighting, so they're more likely than others. But let's say you could create a decision called day of the week, and you could put Monday to Sunday or whichever days you want in there, if you like, of equal randomness. And then what you can do when you create a timetable is you can refer to the decision that you created in there, and you might say, if it's equal to Sunday, then this train enters, and if it doesn't, then it won't. And what happens is when the simulator runs, it won't do anything until it finds the first train that has that decision specified against it. Now, in some cases you might have that apply to all of your trains, but in other cases you might only add it to a couple. So the first time it encounters that decision in there, the simulation will choose one of your random options and effectively then lock that in against your simulation. So then let's say it picks Saturday, then from then on only trains that have decision day of the week Saturday are going to run. And you can also increase that. You could say any of Monday or Saturday, you know, that kind of thing as well. So there's a bit of variation. It's kind of fun, except of course it is random, so you might want to play a busy version of it and it picks Sunday, so then you effectively would have to close it down and run it again and just keep going until it picks the day that you want. Or you could go into the decision obviously and remove the days that you don't want to happen, but a little bit clunky. I think in most cases people would probably rather choose the day from a drop down list, but anyway. So what can we do instead? Well, this is an example of a simplifier that I started building for Wolverhampton, and this is effectively very similar to the layout, or certainly this part is very similar to the layout that you'd find in a working timetable. So you have timed locations and you can see them down the side. This is the pretty description, and that is tip lock code, which we'll look at in a second. And then all we do is we say, well, we're going to have a table here for up trains, and you can see here that starts at 1 minute past midnight, so that's the first one. And I'm not sure if I can go, yeah, if I go right to the end, you'll see that this goes all the way through to 23:48 at the end of the day, and you can see that's column GD, so that's quite a few columns. That's about, what, for 200 maybe 200 entries for up trains. And then within here, again, to get that kind of realism, I've also recorded the days that train runs. I've also included certain things that I'm kind of interested in, just in terms of getting an accurate listing of the tractive effort, what's pulling these trains. So I put working numbers in there, and power at the minute I've used these sort of references over to train types. So ID1 is a class 50 with 7 Mark IIs on the back. So effectively those two are class 50 hauled trains. And at some point I'll go through and I'll work out the rest of these train types as well. Some of them I've already done and others I haven't. But the other reason the spreadsheet is really helpful is I can highlight anything that I'm not sure about. So if I've got here a light loco working, it just seems to appear at, you know, Wolverhampton North Junction at 2:09. That's all the information I found. And so at some point I'm probably going to have to fill in some of these, because some of them will be mandatory timing entries in SimSig. And although SimSig isn't massively strict about what you can import and what you can edit, if a train isn't valid by the time it's due to enter, it won't enter. So that's why it's really important that as you sort of test your timetable, you add your service, you can go in, and then once you've done it, you can hit validate. And if it doesn't validate, like I say, you've got something missing, and it usually tells you what's wrong. So what is there an easier way? I mean, how long is it going to take me to physically go through these dialogues and type in all of these things manually? It's going to take me an absolute age, and that's why I created the importer tool, which effectively takes these spreadsheets and turns them directly into SimSig spreadsheets, which you can then import either into your list of normal timetables, or you could keep them somewhere separate, however you want to do it. So let me introduce you to this tool. It's available on GitHub. So if you look here, not the issues tab, that's not what you're interested in. You're probably interested in releases. So if you look there, github.com/lucas/simsig_importer/releases. I mean, if you go to the bit without releases on the end, you'll just get to the front page, and then the releases is down here. And then in general, just pick the top one of these, or you don't really need to actually click on it. What you need is that MSI. So that's the installer that will install the software on your local machine. And it might come up with a warning, and that's because the software isn't signed, but I don't feel like paying £300 a year to sign my software just so that warning goes away. So don't worry about it. There's nothing weird about it. As long as you get it from github.com and nowhere else, then there shouldn't be anything wrong with it. It's kind of too small to be a virus, I think. But if I show you what that looks like, I'm actually running it from the development environment, but don't worry, that's just because I've got it up and running already, so it's just a bit easier. So if I run this, what's going on? Right, so this is what it looks like. It's a fairly noddy looking app. You can see here that you have a list of all the simulations. They're not all fully supported, and I'll explain in what difference that will make. These pieces of information here are just the information that you get off the front of the timetable window. So that is you can see the name, description, start and end times, and the version numbers. That's purely up to you how you handle those. That version number is actually the version number of the timetable, and again I'm going to try and get those somehow to tie in with the simulations, because what happens is if the developer guys make an update to Wolverhampton, let's say they fix something or they add in a new junction or something like that, then certain timetables, older timetables, might not work on the new simulation. So they version the timetable, and then when you try and open it, you sometimes get a warning saying this timetable is for an earlier version of Wolverhampton. I'm not sure actually if it still lets you run it and says that's up to you. But anyway, I'd kind of like to tie the versions up so that it's not a magic number that you've got to try and work out. So as well as that data, you then have the export options, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the first thing that's I've built into this, and at the minute it only supports Wolverhampton because that's the one that I am working on, is this generate button. So if I hit generate, it will ask me for somewhere to write a spreadsheet to. Make sure that's not the open one there, is it? No. So if I do that and overwrite it, you can see here it's written a template. Now, what has that actually done? Well, it's given me the starting point for my simplifier, for my timetable. So if I open these, you can see here it does a bit of a weird thing with the tab selection, but don't worry. You can see here that it's got seed groups and train types. These aren't necessarily in a sensible order. This is the template sheet that it copies from, and what it's actually done in the case of Wolverhampton is it's created a general up direction, so Stafford down to Galton Junction near Birmingham, a down one which is sort of the other way. Now these aren't exactly the same because some of these have entry locations and some of them don't. I'll just mention that in a second. But on Wolverhampton there are also trains that run from Stafford around to Cosford. They go around a chord, so they effectively go from being up trains to down trains, and that doesn't really work with split timetables. There's nothing really you can do about it. In a real paper working timetable, all they do is continue the working on another sheet, and it's just up to the signaller to work out that working sort of come down here halfway, and then it's sort of gone here and gone down a bit, and then maybe come back again, and it can actually be really confusing. So in here, what I've done is I've allowed you to say, well, if it's going to be awkward to do this and that, then what we need to do is add another couple of sheets which will give you the locations that you need in order to go from up to down or down to up without actually doing anything weird. And so that will allow you to just add a couple more trains. Now you'll notice that this isn't in exactly the same format as these ones here, because I've been working on these recently. They have a few more features that I've added, so I'll just talk through the features. But otherwise, if you have already created something like this, then it is possible to copy most of this directly from the sheet and paste it into here. You might just need to add a few, well, not necessarily that one, but this one. You might just need to add a few more rows somewhere. Or let's say, for example, there might be an item on here which isn't on your simplifier, in which case you'll have to work out, is it that line, or do I need to take these times and paste them into a different row? But it's pretty much a copy and paste job from whatever you want to do. So if we actually look at the template ones, which are the most accurate at the minute, so we can see what's going on. The first thing to note is that internally SimSig uses tip lock locations for the different parts of the simulation, places where a train is allowed to stop. And if you actually search for tip lock codes, you'll find this site at railwaycodes.org, which is fantastic. If we look for, say, Wolverhampton, for example, wherever it is, Workington, Worcester, well, it doesn't really matter because you'll get the example. But let's say Wolverhampton North Junction, for example, the tip lock code is WVRMTNJ. They tend to be up to 8 characters, I think, and not longer than that, maybe 7. So that is what is used here in the first column. Now, if you are not writing something for Wolverhampton at the minute, and so that generate button is not going to work, it's not going to do anything for you, then you will need to work these out yourself. Now, for the normal tip lock codes, it's fairly straightforward, because what you'd have to do is find them out from in here. But the other thing to note is these entry locations on SimSig don't have the same tip lock code as the actual location. So you'll see that if we look at the down one here, the tip lock code for Stafford Trent Valley Junction is actually STAF TVJ, which kind of looks right and sounds right. You'll see that it's something very different here, and E is E for entry, and then it's the up Stour lines. So, or maybe up Stafford Trent Valley, I'm not sure. So that's a completely different code. Now, it's a bit annoying because that's a SimSig specific code. The way that you would have to find out what those are, and it's a little bit annoying, you could ask on the forum, because one of the developers might just be able to get you that list quite easily. But otherwise, what you need to do is you need to create a timetable inside SimSig. You need to then go to with a train entering at Stafford Trent Valley, and maybe have a train for each of the entry points, just so you can work out what they are. And then you have to go timetable save as, and save that somewhere. And then what you can do is, and you only need to do this once, because once you've got your list of stuff, you're not going to have to mess around anymore. If you see here luketest.wtt, I don't think I have that open at the minute. If you rename that timetable to be a .zip file, a lot of file formats now are just zip files, so all you need to just rename it. If you then extract that, and you look in the one that says saved timetable, that's the one that's got basically all of the information that you need in it. If I now bring that over here, we can then see, if you look for entry point, you can see here what these codes are. So that's Oxley carriage sidings, which you might be able to work out just by what it's called, and you can see a couple of different ones depending on where you are. You know, EDGJ, for example, is entry point down Grand Junction lines, which, if you're interested, is basically Darlaston Junction up here. So you can kind of work those out and put them into your spreadsheet. There's something else that you could do that would be really helpful that I'll mention in a minute. But that's what these locations are. You will need all of the ones that are mandatory for your simulation. So if you look in your simulation manual on simsig.co.uk, you'll find in there a list usually of all of the locations that have to have a timing in them in order to validate. It's not the end of the world if you miss it, but what will happen is that train won't validate, and so it won't enter, just like other validation errors. And to save you having to go through every single one of 200 or 400 trains and hit validate button, which will be a bit annoying, if you just make sure in here you can make it did something weird. You can make it bold if you wanted to, just to make that if a train goes past there, it needs a time. They will mostly line up with the working timetable mandatory timing points, but there are a couple of places, like in Wolverhampton, where Bushbury Junction here is a mandatory timing location, but it isn't in the working timetable. So what that means is I'm kind of adding a minute onto that, or subtracting a minute off that to work out what the time location should be. But then you can pretty much fill those in, and that's all grand. The other bits you can do here, at the minute there are a couple of unimportant rows that I've added for later. So these ones here are the important ones. So head code is effectively the ID of the train, so something like 1M41. The unique ID allows you to give it something different, so you might have a 1M41 and 1M41-2, so you could give it a unique ID there. That's fine. The power is just a reference to something on the train type sheet. So you can give these ID, you can call them whatever you like, as long as they're unique. If they're not unique, then they won't link up properly, but it won't crash. So let's say you might have, I don't know, class 86 might be your, well, maybe that should have been called class 86. And then in your timetable, you could say, right, this is class 86. oh, did I spell it wrong? Class 86. And then that, when it loads this into SimSig, it will automatically link that with the train specified as class 86. If it can't find that train, if you've given the reference here the wrong value, then this will be seen as a custom one. But by default, the custom ones in the importer tool are going to have 0 miles an hour, so they're not going to go anywhere. So that's not going to be much good. So just yeah, watch out for those, but be careful that you got them right. The days are just the timetable days, Monday only, Saturday only, whatever it is. So you just put those in there. Pretty much, I think every working timetable uses the same set of codes. I've never seen any different ones, and they will need to be in the right format because the importer tool is going to look for them with an O or an X on the end, or on Sunday if you add those in as well, they just need to go in as sun, so that's fine. As required is optional. This allows you to set the as required, you know, does it run all of the time or not. So if you go here and you add a new train, you can see you could say it only runs 50% of the time. So if you want that functionality and you just put 50 in there, then that's what you have to do. And then seeding, at the minute I haven't implemented seeding groups, but if you want to seed the train at a signal, again, unfortunately, it's simulation specific as to what the name is. But so again, you could go in here, create a timetable, seed a train at that location, export it, rename it to .zip, and find out what it is. But for example, in Wolverhampton, the signal number might be Wolverhampton 191, but that is actually referenced as signal 191. Don't know what happens in other simulations, unfortunately. I suspect in the larger simulations they'll have to have different prefixes because they'll cover, you might have more than one signal, 50 or whatever. So that's all you have to do in there. Let's just get rid of that a second. And then all you have to do then in the importer tool is, once you've generated those, you can work on them. You work on them as long as you want, and you can always test it, export it to SimSig, try it out. If you find some problems, you can go back into your spreadsheet, tweak them a little bit, and then reread it, re-export it, re-import it, and do all the rest of it. So it's obviously an iterative process. So let's say, for example, then you go, okay, I've been doing one. So let's just take this one. I'm not actually sure, because it's quite an old spreadsheet, whether I find out whether it actually imports. I expect it will come up with a lot of errors. But oh, and it can't be called Scratch. This has to be called Template, which is not Template, Timetable, which is what would be called if you generate it.